All right, so as he just said, my name's Hannah Quinn, and I'm going to be presenting my research on the effect of mood on cognitive functions. So to start off, what is mood? Mood is a temporary state of mind or feeling, and there are a lot of different types of moods, as you can see from this chart right here, but mostly there's like happiness, sadness, feeling excited, or even feeling anger. But sometimes moods can get out of hand. So what happens when a mood becomes persistent or affects everyday life or becomes maladaptive? That is called mood disorders, as you can see from me right there saying it again. So what is the most common type of mood disorder? That would be depression, which affects approximately 16.1 million American adults per year. And depression is characterized by low mood, poor concentration, slower speech, memory difficulties, as well as loss of interest or pleasure in activities you used to enjoy. So I'm going to be talking about the major theory of depression, which is frontal lobe asymmetry, and then I'm going to be connecting that theory to mood. Then I'm going to go into what my hypothesis was for my research, a little bit about what I did, the results I found, and then how these results can be applied in the real world. So you might be thinking, what is frontal lobe asymmetry? And basically, frontal lobe asymmetry is an imbalance of activity in the frontal lobes. And typically, the right frontal lobe is associated with negative emotions, and the left frontal lobe is associated with positive emotions. And people with major depression tend to have more right frontal lobe activity than left frontal lobe activity, which makes sense as to why they'd be experiencing low mood or sadness, because there's more activity in that right frontal lobe with the negative emotions there and less positive emotions. So frontal lobe asymmetry can give us some insight into depression risk. So people who just naturally have more right frontal lobe activity than left are at more risk for depression, at greater risk for depression. But it also gives us insight into the symptoms of depression. So it makes sense that people with depression experience sadness because they have more activation on that right side. But also it might give us some insight into why they experience like other symptoms, like difficulty concentrating or language difficulties, memory difficulties as well. But it can also help us with potentially future treatment or future detection of depression. So frontal lobe asymmetry also applies to different mood states. So different mood states have different variations of asymmetry as well, with sadness mimicking depression in the sense that there's more right than left, and happiness being the opposite, more left activity than right frontal activity. So as you can see, depression and sadness kind of affect the cortex in a similar way. Maybe sadness isn't as severely impacted as depression, but they are comparable, and therefore we can study them, and we can kind of imply things about depression by studying people who are induced with sadness. So what exactly do the frontal lobes do? They do a lot of things, actually. They do mostly like executive functions. So things like memory, specifically like working memory, your short-term memory a little bit as well. But additionally deals with language, specifically like language production, speaking, things like that. And also with long-term planning and decision-making. So based on this, we should see that depending on frontal lobe asymmetry, which side is more activated, we should see differences in these functions, depending on which side those functions are modulated in, or that are mostly apparent in. So this leads to my hypothesis, which was that people with an induced happy mood would be better at left frontal activities and worse at right frontal lobe activities. Whereas the opposite would be true for sad mood. So they would do better on tasks with the right frontal lobe and worse with those on the left. So to do this, I had a total of 24 participants, and the actual study was broken up into 3 sections. So the first was the mood induction task, the second being the left frontal lobe task, and the third, the right frontal lobe task. So to induce mood, I broke my participants up into 3 groups. So there was the sad group, the neutral group, and the happy group. And the sad group watched a clip from My Girl. The neutral group watched a clip from All the President's Men. and the happy group watched Rowan Atkinson's comedy sketch, Toby the Devil. So to assess left frontal lobe function, I chose to assess verbal fluency, which was using a verbal fluency task. Makes sense. And to assess right frontal lobe function, I wanted to assess working memory, which I did using AN and back tasks. So what did I find? For verbal fluency, as you can see from this chart here, we've got the three mood conditions. We've got sad, neutral, and happy. And on this axis, we have verbal fluency, which I measured in number of words. So for the sad condition, about 15.3 words. And then for the neutral condition, a bit higher at 16.92. And how did the happy group do? Little drum roll right here. We got 19.15. And as you can see, there's a big difference between the sad and the happy groups. And just as we expected, the neutral group was right in between those, which indicates that our hypothesis was confirmed, especially since it was significant with a p-value of 0.014. Now for working memory, we have the same conditions on the bottom. And on this left axis, we have accuracy, which I measured in percent accuracy. So the sad group, 68.39% accuracy. The neutral group at 65.36. And happy group, 73.75. So this is interesting because the neutral group actually did worse than both groups, which we did not expect. I expected to see a similar chart to before, except facing the opposite direction. But what's interesting here is that the happy group still did better than the sad group, which was the opposite of what we expected. However, this was not significant, did not reach the 0.05. But was the hypothesis confirmed? Partly yes, because happy mood increased verbal fluency, and sad mood diminished verbal fluency. But partly no, because happy mood appeared to increase accuracy, but so did sad mood, which we did not expect to find. So what does this mean? This basically means that happy mood increases left frontal activation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it increases, or that happy mood decreases right frontal lobe activation. But the direction of the working memory data suggests that both happy and sad moods increase working memory function, and happy mood increases slightly more. So again, this supports the hypothesis that mood impacts cognitive functions associated with the left frontal lobe, but it doesn't indicate that mood affects cognitive functions of the right frontal lobe, which was not what we expected to find. So in simple terms, sadness and depression don't positively impact functions of the right frontal lobe, but it does indicate that sadness and depression deteriorate or diminish performance of left frontal lobe tasks. So what does this mean for us? It gives us a little bit more insight into the symptoms of depression and can even help us to improve treatments, like maybe inducing a happy mood in depressed patients to reduce that cognitive deficit that they experience with memory and language and things like that. And also it adds to the idea that we can use frontal lobe asymmetry as a marker for depression risk. Any questions?
I can get us started.
Okay.
So I noticed that your female-male spread wasn't like a perfect 50-50.
Right.
Did you notice an impact with that? And also, did you notice a difference between males and females?
I didn't notice a specific difference in the results of males and females, but I mean, it'd be interesting to kind of isolate those groups and maybe run an experiment where you run those groups separately to see if there is a difference. But based on the data, I really don't think that that difference did too much with these parts of the experiment, I suppose.
So there was a benefit to inducing the happy mood on the fluency, but there was no benefit for inducing the happy mood on working memory?
Not statistically significant,
Okay.
but it did improve it more so than the sad group and the neutral group. So there is evidence that that might be the case, but it just wasn't significant.
Okay. And do you do you kind of see that as a possible way of kind of improving performance in this case? If you were, for example, going to an exam where you have to write an essay, would it be beneficial to watch The Devil by Rowan Atkinson?
I mean, it makes sense. I think that would have some impact on your like your frontal asymmetry, but also I think it just would reduce your tension, your nerves, and things like that. So not necessarily isolated with that activation in the brain, but I think that could obviously have a really good effect.
Hannah, did you do a manipulation check for the mood induction?
I did.
Okay.
I used the positive and negative affect schedule, which assessed participants' mood before and after with both positive and negative adjectives to describe their mood.
So the funny movie did make them happier?
Yes, it did.
And how long, just methodologically, how long between the mood induction, the schedule of moods, and the cognitive or other tasks, the language tasks?
So the positive and negative affect schedule probably, it takes around a minute.
Oh, okay.
And then immediately after that, it went right into the verbal fluency, and there was no break between the three conditions of that. So using the letter F, A, and then letter S, and listing words there. But then there was a 2-minute break between the verbal fluency task and the working memory task, just to kind of give some cognitive rest there.
And did everybody do those two tasks in the same order, or did you?
Yes, everybody did it in the same order. There's no evidence that there was any like order effects with those tasks, so I didn't find it necessary.
How did you decide on your initial stimuli? From the pictures that you put up, the sad one had pictures of women, and the neutral and the positive were both pictures of men doing different things.
That's an interesting interpretation. But I would definitely say that I chose a previous study which investigated different mood videos and their like how strongly they induced a certain mood that was desired. So I picked from that study the most significant differences. So the sad clip I chose was the best for inducing the sad mood. Same with the neutral and happy condition.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.